Well, just this week, I saw that there was a job fair right here in Huntsville, and it was for the hospitality industry, the service industry, and it made me think about a job posting that I saw not too long ago, and it was by McCormick, the spice making company. And you guys probably are familiar with McCormick. They make all kind of seasonings that you can put into foods and onto foods. Well, the job title was the best job title ever, the Director of Taco Relations. That was the actual job title for the job. And if you're looking for a job, I just want to bless you today, okay? So here's the job description. Are you looking to take your love for tacos to the next level? As the Director of Taco Relations, you will be McCormick's resident consulting taco expert. You will be our official eyes and ears for all things tacos. You'll have the opportunity to work with the McCormick's Kitchens team to develop innovative and delicious taco recipes, travel across the country in search of the latest taco trends, dialogue with other like-minded taco connoisseurs across social media, and be in on the latest street taco seasoning mixes developed by the McCormick's Innovation Lab. Well, it's been great being your pastor. I'm thinking God's calling me on here to a new job. Well, welcome to Rocket City Church. I pray that God has already blessed you in a special way today and shown up in your life. We are in the tail end of a message series that we are calling Upstream. And week one of Upstream was characterized by us talking about a lot of the brokenness and the pain and the hurt and the injustice that exists in our society and even within our own relationships, right? And physically, as Josh was talking about earlier during worship, just the hardship that life brings to us and around us, and where does that come from? And so I challenged you to go on a journey with us, grab a paddle, jump in a boat, and travel upstream, and begin to look at, well, at the headwaters, the start of it all. Where did this start, and how did it start, and then where are we now downstream as a result? And so week one, we unpacked that at the headwaters, if we go all the way upstream, all that we're seeing and experiencing around us comes and it stems from the sinful human heart at the base of it all. And then week two, we talked about marriage and how at the heart of marriage, if you travel upstream, the intent was to make us holy and not make us happy. And the key to all of that is self-sacrifice. And then in week three, we talked about parenting and how the most important thing that we can do for our kids is for us as parents to walk and talk with God. And if we walk and talk with God, and then in turn we walk and talk with our kids and we have conversations with them, and we love Jesus first and foremost, and then we invite them into that journey with us, then ultimately God will move us in his direction, in the direction that he would have our family to go. And then last week, Andy came up and he talked about children and teens and students and how as parents, we are to form them and shape them as much as we can, and they are to be a part of what God is doing in our family. But then ultimately, kind of like an arrow, right, that we release them, we shape them, we mold them as best we possibly can, and then we release them on faith, and God takes it from there. Well, today wraps up our Upstream series, and we're going to talk about culture and community. And here's the challenge right up front is that after traveling for 4 weeks upstream, you know that as Jesus followers, based on what we've talked about, like we are called to live different than those who say they are not followers of Jesus. By very definition of following Jesus, there is a difference in that different nature of following Christ. And so in some circles in the past, following Jesus in culture, well, it looked different for different people. And so if you go back to Jesus's day, well, there was a group of religious people called the Pharisees, and for them, looking different meant boundaries. And if they were to obey God, they had to erect walls between them and the culture that surrounded them. And that was an excellent case in point is the story of the Good Samaritan, right? They had to go around this person that was hurting and wounded, and they couldn't even get close to them because they didn't want to contaminate themselves. And then if you fast forward several hundred years, like you come to now we have the Amish, and the Amish say, well, our culture stopped at this one point in time, and we are going to isolate ourselves from the rest of the culture around us. So 3 summers ago, we went to an Amish farm in northern Indiana to buy our chocolate lab that we so love as our family dog. And we were kind of wondering what was going on because we would text the number for the lab, and then it would take a couple hours for us to get a text back. And then we pulled up and realized it was an Amish farm, and then it all made sense. And so I guess everything stopped about the 1700s except for cell phones. I guess cell phones still work today for them. But then today, we even see groups that try to live out their faith, but externally, they want to make sure you know that they are different. And as a kid, we grew up in central Louisiana, and there were some religious folks around us, and they would dress differently and kind of act differently than a lot of people. And I remember one of the unique parts about how they thought they were to be different than culture was that you shouldn't have a TV in your home. And then I realized, well, then a lot of them would have a TV in their home, but it would be like in the closet or the attic. So if other people came over, they wouldn't see a TV out, but then they had a TV. So I guess other places were okay. I don't know. And ultimately, where does the concept that if we are following God, we're following Jesus, that we are to be different than the rest of society or the rest of culture? Well, it comes from the Bible, and it comes from God's word. And if you look back through the Old Testament, then God would continually tell his people, like, hey, you can be different in that you can follow me with your whole hearts, and I will take care of you. You don't have to rely on other nations or other powers to take care of you and to provide for you. I will be that for you. And so God tried to outline this concept with these 10 rules called the 10 Commandments. And in there, God said, look, honor the Sabbath. Like, just take a day a week and unplug and take it off because you need the rest. Your body needs the rest. My people need the rest. And he included some other challenges in there, like, hey, do not murder, do not steal, do not lie, honor your father and mother. And all of these 10 Commandments were meant to show other neighboring people that, hey, these are the people of God. These are my chosen people. And then when they began to veer from God's plan for their life in and of the culture, and they began to take on other cultures and other traditions that weren't of God, then God would go to extreme measures, not just to legalistically turn them back to him, but ultimately, Scripture would talk and shares a lot in the Old Testament, and God shares this statement a lot that he wanted the people's hearts to turn back to him. Remember, I said in week 1, we talked about if we travel upstream, all the issues that we have today stem from the sinful human heart. And so here God's longing was to turn people's hearts back to him. And so he would go to extreme measures to do that, and extreme measures like taking a guy named Abram and his wife named Sarai, and he would say, hey, move away from your homeland, pack up all your stuff, and I'm going to take you to a land I'll show you, right? And he's like, what? And then eventually I'm going to give you a kid, even though you're almost 100 years old, right? I'm going to bless you supernaturally. I mean, that's an extreme measure. And then God takes a young gal named Esther, and she becomes queen, and he does that to save the Israelite people. And he takes a young kid named David, and he gives him some stones and a slingshot, and he takes down an incredible giant, a seasoned warrior. You see, God goes to extreme measures to get our attention and to turn our hearts back to him. And why does he do that? Well, because he loves us. We're his kids. We're his creation. God even called down fire from heaven. He had one of his prophets swallowed by a whale or a mammal of some sort and spit out on a beach. We're actually going to talk about Jonah in this fall in one of our teaching series. Remember, God is a jealous God, and he wants all of us, not just part of us or a percentage of us or even a high percentage of us, but he wants all of us that there is. You know, as a side note, as we're talking about traveling upstream, how does God often turn our hearts back to him? Well, in a way that kind of goes against normal thinking. He typically uses one person. He uses one gal, one student, one teenager, one child, one man, one senior, back to him. Look, you guys, never underestimate the power of one person fully submitted and fully giving all of themselves over to Jesus. Never underestimate the power that lies in that reality. Well, what does God finally do? Well, he sends one man. He sends his son, Jesus, to earth, and he says, look, this is going to take care of this human sin condition, this sinful heart. Like, if you'll follow my son and begin to give him your heart, then I'll begin to work on the inside out of your life. But Jesus came, and he came into a real culture. He didn't exist above the culture or below the culture or beside the culture or outside the culture. Like, Jesus was born in a Middle Eastern culture that had many different subcultures that were around it. And in and through that culture, he began to live, and he began to live a different way. He would love people that other people would say, you can't love them. He would touch lepers and people that had diseases, and they would say, oh, you can't. You've got a social distance from those folks. And Jesus says, look, I don't care. Right? I'm going to communicate my love in this way for people that everybody else has said, oh, they're untouchable. Jesus said, I want to bless those who persecute me. In fact, listen to the words from the very first sermon that Jesus ever spoke on the earth when he started his public ministry in Luke chapter 4. Look at his words. He quotes from the Old Testament, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim that captives are released, that the blind will see, that the oppressed will be set free, and that the time of the Lord's favor has come. God sends his Son for the exclusive purpose of making an eternal difference in the world, but he did so by having him also live differently in that world. For those that were marginalized by society, Jesus brought them in. For those that were blind, Jesus helped them to see. For those that were oppressed, he began to set them free. And all of this was upstream countercultural living and teaching at the time. And so by doing so, Jesus began to establish a new culture, a fresh culture, one that was of heaven and not of earth. And so what if for us today, that if we didn't erect walls and boundaries like the Pharisees did, but we engaged culture, believing that Jesus has transformed our life and is in the process of transforming our life? And so in turn, that as long as we live in society and in culture, that God then wants to take us and use us as the hands and feet of Jesus to transform the world around us. Do you believe that? And I hope so. For us, our mission, do you believe that? And I hope so. For us, our mission here, follow Jesus. And how do we hope to accomplish that? Well, it's by you and me taking the love of God that we have in our hearts and taking that out every day in our Monday through Friday lives and transforming the world around us, one conversation at a time, one serving opportunity at a time, one prayer at a time, one listening ear at a time. How do we accomplish this ultimately? Well, it's by all of us being on mission together and living and breathing and doing life with Christ together, and in seeing our community and our families and our culture transformed. Well, I believe that our church is full of a bunch of people that are going to do amazing things for Jesus, and it starts by all of us living a distinctive life. You say, well, Brian, where did you get that from? Living a distinctive life, what do you mean by that? Well, Paul lays this out for us in Romans chapter 12, verse 1. And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind that he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way that you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Paul says that we are to be a living sacrifice, a holy sacrifice to God. And the term holy just means set apart for God's exclusive use. Now, some Jesus followers, they think that set apart means separate. It means kind of having your holy huddle where you circle up and you do your thing and nothing ever really gets messy inside that holy huddle. At Rocket City Church, we have a saying, and it's don't be weird. Because sometimes, let's face it, some people of faith can just completely be kind of weird about it, right? And they can either be super aggressive or just totally pulled back and isolated and or somewhere in between. And just this week, I realized that there's a thing called an army worm. I don't really know why it's called an army worm. Well, it should be called maybe a Navy worm because it's like below the surface of the deep in my yard. And so my son said he saw something in our yard, and so we went out into the yard this week and we flipped over one of our gutters, and sure enough there was this army worm. And he's like, Dad, what is that? I said, well, I think it's an army worm. I don't really know. And he goes, well, is it real? And I go, well, yeah, it's real. Is it alive? And I'm like, well, I think it's alive. And so he takes his finger and he pokes the army worm, right, to see if the army worm is alive and real. Man, I think that when we're able to rub shoulders with people in our everyday life that need Jesus, they're looking to see if who we are and who we follow and what we say and the Jesus that we say that we love is real, right? And they're looking to find authenticity in our life, and they're figuratively kind of poking around and watching us to see if we're fully alive in Christ, and are we passionate, and do we really believe what we're saying and talking about? And because they've kind of heard that, we're part of this new upstart church, and is it authentic, and is that something that I would want to be a part of? Does this faith thing, does it really work? Or is it just something that people do? Man, what if we were a church full of people who actually listened and cared when a coworker began to talk about one of their personal life crises? I think that, matter of fact, I know that God has called us to live a distinct life, not above others, not below others, not on either side of others, but along with others. And because Jesus is transforming us one day at a time, one moment at a time, then in turn, we will then help Christ transform culture. Well, I dream of a church. I dream of a church that travels upstream and begins to try to establish the kingdom of heaven here on earth, not just through living a distinctive life, but also possessing a passionate faith. Possessing a passionate faith. In Isaiah chapter 7, verse 9, we read earlier where God talked about faith. And I want us to listen to this passage of Scripture from Isaiah chapter 7, verse 9. He says, if you will not believe, you certainly shall not last. Here God is making a case of saying, look, just believe in me. Look, I will sustain you. I will help you last. I will help you remain strong in all that I've called you to do. Paddling upstream, it takes faith, right? It takes belief in the one that came to die for us. And not just temporary faith, but big, bold faith. Faith that says, even if or no matter what, I will believe. What if the culture of Rocket City Church is one that passionately believes in who God is and what he can do in and through our lives and how he can transform a community if we only believe? What if we possess passion and excitement with our faith, believing that no matter how dark the day is, we will believe for the impossible? Look, I always want to take big risk for God. Josh read it earlier, but deep sea, deep water adventure, sign me up for that type of faith. I mean, safe living and close to the shore adventures, you don't pay much money for that, right? But it's the deep water adventures where the water gets kind of rough and shaky and you need God to show up. How is our faith and our passion for Jesus? Passionate faith flows out of personal prayer to God. Passionate faith flows out of personal prayer. We just today are ending our 21 days of prayer where we were praying for more in every part of life. And we gather on Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. just to pray that God would show up today, that God would tug on our hearts in a fresh and new way. He would teach us something new about himself that we could in turn use to live out in the culture where he has planted us in 2021. I always find that when my passion fades, my prayer life fades. And when my prayer life increases, then my passion increases for Jesus. And so we gather every Saturday because we want to be a church that's characterized by passionate faith. One of my favorite quotes about faith and prayer is from E.M. Bounds. And E.M. Bounds said, only God moves mountains, but faith and prayer move God. How many of you have a mountain that needs to be moved in your life? Well, faith and prayer move God, and God is the one that actually moves mountains. And I also dream of a church that lives in culture to transform culture through extending unconditional love to others. Now, if we're going to establish the kingdom of heaven here on earth and be the church that God's called us to be, we have to extend an unconditional love. Paul says a little bit later in chapter 12, verse 9, don't just pretend to love others, really love them. Don't just pretend to love others, but really love them. In 1960, Robert Kennedy was campaigning in the Appalachian area of West Virginia, and he was campaigning in the ghettos and the poor areas of America for his brother, and his heart and his mind began to be transformed as he saw all the brokenness and the hurt and the pain and the injustice all around him that seemingly he could do nothing about. He couldn't fix it overnight with a snap of his fingers. And he realized that how he grew up was very different than how these people were growing up. And he told a reporter this. He said, I found out something that I never knew. I found out that my world wasn't the real world. I found out that my world wasn't the real world. See, I grew up in a loving home where my parents valued Jesus and made church and faith and the community of believers a priority for us, but also lived in the world and sought to transform the world around them for Jesus as best they knew how to do it. And they raised us up, and then eventually, like Andy talked about, they released us out into the world to serve God on our own. But I'm realizing the older I get how rare that opportunity was that was afforded me as a kid. And in every neighborhood that we live, in every apartment complex where we find ourselves, in every job that we are working, there are people that need Jesus. There are people that have real stuff that's going on. And how do we know? Because we have real stuff that's going on in our life. And they desperately need Christ to transform them. They need the unconditional love of Jesus followers like us to come alongside them and listen to them and serve them and just love them right where they are. I love what Pastor Rick Warren out in California says. He says, it's interesting that Jesus compared fishing with ministry. Both are messy. And man, it's so much easier when God just brings people our way that are all neatly packaged and wrapped up nice, right? And then that just never happens because people are people and we are people. And that's not us, and so that's not others. What if we as a church extended unconditional love to those around us? How might that transform our culture and our community and even our nation? You know, here at Rocket City Church, we have another saying, lead with love. We want to be known by our love more than anything else in our church. Well, finally, I believe that as we paddle upstream and as we seek to live a distinctive life and we possess a passionate faith and we extend unconditional love, then we will have a dynamic message to share. Because see, the message never changes. It's always Christ and Him crucified and risen. And how that love that He extended on the cross can extend to our hearts and it can transform us and change us from the inside out. That message never changes. But the methods change. I mean, we have vibrant worship music. We have lights. We use social media. I have a paddle right here on my table. I have a canoe that you probably can't see right over here. I mean, we will do anything short of sin to help you reach one more person for Jesus, to help us reach one more life for God, because we believe that it's only God, it's only Jesus that changes the human heart. Man, we've sold the farm, so to speak, on the concept of bless, and bless is just a 5-letter word. And if you're new to Rocket City Church, you may not know, but the B stands for begin with prayer, and the L is listen, the E is eat, the S is serve, and the final S is share. Look, when we're praying for other people and we're listening to them and we're sharing a cup of coffee or eventually a meal or dessert or something with them and then we're serving them any way we can, then we're praying, God, open up a window or a door in a conversation or just a moment that I can have with them on a Zoom call that maybe they jump on early, as do I, and we're just catching up, and all of a sudden I hear about a tragedy in their life or a mountain in their family, and I have a moment to just say, you know what, I'm going to be praying about that for you if that's okay. Right? It's not much, but we're just taking a baby step in that direction for God. Well, in case you don't know, there's a new movie coming out called Spider-Man No Way Home. And I just saw that this past week when the trailer was released for this particular movie, within 24 hours of it being released, it became the #1 most viewed movie trailer of all time, viewed 355 million times. #1 most viewed movie trailer of all time. Look, when we live as the people of God on mission, we become a movie trailer, a preview for coming attractions for the kingdom of heaven. You tracking with me on this? That when we love someone that, well, we're not really supposed to love, right? When we live a little differently, not weird, but we just live differently, right? We listen to people that other people don't have time for. We include people that nobody else is including. When we help do something small that helps bring justice to an unjust situation, when we stick a situation, when we stick up for somebody, when we live a life of integrity, when we extend unconditional love, then all of a sudden we become a preview of coming attractions. And we get to say, hey, look, it's just me I'm just one person, right? We're just one family. Man, I got here about 6 o'clock, 6:15 this morning, and there was a ton of people already here. Man, I saw a 7th, 8th grade kid right in this room helping run cords and set up lights. And that means this kid got up at like 5:15. I don't know one junior high kid that gets up at 5 or 5:15 in the morning, right? Like, who does that? All so that we